The chill of the water wasn't the worst part. It was the sudden, dead silence of the room. 100 conversations, the clinking of silver on porcelain, the soft strains of a string quartet, all of it vanished, sucked into a vacuum of shock. All that remained was the drip, drip, drip of ice water from Clara's bangs onto the polished Italian marble floor of Aria, the city's most lauded temple of gastronomy. Her crisp white uniform, her pride and her shield, was soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second, colder one. Across from her, Isabella Thorne, heiress to the Thorne-Sterling fortune, held the now empty crystal tumbler, her lips curled into a triumphant smirk. Her two friends, carbon copies in couture, were stifling giggles behind manicured hands, their phones held high, capturing every second of Clara's utter humiliation for their legion of online followers. Clara's mind went blank. The carefully memorized wine pairings, the specials of the day, the name of every regular, all gone. There was only the sting of cold, the heat of 100 pairs of eyes, and the crushing weight of failure. This job was her lifeline. It was the only thing standing between her grandmother's mounting medical bills and the cold reality of losing their small, third-floor apartment. She could feel the tears welling, hot and shameful, and she fought them back with a ferocity born of desperation. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. But what none of them saw, what no one ever noticed, was the old man seated alone in the shadowy corner booth, partially obscured by a marble column. He hadn't touched his consommé. His hands, knotted with age but steady, rested on the handle of a silver-tipped cane. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, had missed nothing. He wasn't just another wealthy patron enjoying a solitary meal. He was the architect of this entire world, the man who had laid the first stone of this empire. And the storm he was about to unleash would not just shatter Isabella's gilded cage, it would redefine the very meaning of power, legacy, and worth. To understand how a single glass of water could capsize a dynasty, one must first understand the quiet strength of the girl who refused to drown. Clara Hayes believed in the quiet power of details. It was a lesson learned not in a classroom, but at the side of her grandmother, Eleanor, a woman who could coax stories from the faded photographs in a dusty album or find the beauty in the chipped paint of their apartment's window frame. Eleanor had been a librarian, a curator of stories, and she had passed that reverence for the past, for the small, telling marks of time, on to her granddaughter. For Clara, this manifested as a passion for art history. While her peers were chasing fleeting trends, Clara was lost in the brushstrokes of Sargent, the chiaroscuro of Caravaggio, the quiet dignity of a Vermeer. Her most prized possession was a heavy, dog-eared copy of Janssen's History of Art, its spine held together with packing tape. This passion, however, didn't pay the bills. When Eleanor's heart began to fail, the world of art receded, replaced by the stark, unforgiving numbers on medical invoices and late notices. Clara dropped out of her community college art history program, trading lectures on the Renaissance for 16-hour days, split between a greasy spoon diner and any odd job she could find. Landing the waitress position at Aria had felt like a miracle. The pay was astronomical compared to anything she'd ever known, a beacon of hope in a sea of debt. But the restaurant itself was more than just a job. It was a living museum. The walls were adorned with what Clara recognized as an astonishing private collection of late 19th and early 20th century American art. There was a breathtaking marine landscape that had to be a Winslow Homer, a portrait of a young woman with the unmistakable luminous quality of a Mary Cassatt, and a dark, moody cityscape that screamed of the Ashcan school. During her training, the manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, had spoken of the art in hushed, reverent tones. "The collection is the soul of Aria," he'd said. "It belongs to the founder, the old man, Mr. Finch. He rarely comes in anymore, but his presence is in every frame. His son-in-law, Mr. Thorne, runs things now. Remember that. The Thornes are everything here." Clara remembered. She also noticed things Mr. Dubois did not. She noticed how the light from the chandeliers caught the impasto on a small, unsigned landscape near the service station, a technique so distinctive she was almost certain it was an early work by George Innes. She noticed the subtle craquelure on the cassette, a fine spiderweb of age that was a testament to its authenticity. These paintings were her secret solace during grueling shifts. In the fleeting moments between taking orders and clearing tables, she would steal glances, finding a strange comfort in their silent, timeless beauty. They were a connection to the world she had been forced to leave behind. Her first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and precision. She learned the intricate dance of the service staff, the unspoken rules of fine dining, and the delicate art of being present but invisible. She was good at it. Her quiet nature and observant eye made her efficient and unobtrusive. She learned the preferences of the regulars. Mrs. Vanderbilt in Table 7 liked her water with no ice and a single slice of lemon. Mr. Chen in Table 12 always wanted to hear the fish special first. She had served Isabella Thorne twice before tonight. Each time had been an exercise in biting her tongue. Isabella moved through the world with the destructive force of a hurricane, leaving a trail of belittled staff and impossible demands in her wake. She treated the restaurant as her personal playground and its employees as her disposable toys. Clara had learned to approach her table with a placid smile and a deep, internal reservoir of patience, mentally reciting the dates of the Italian High Renaissance to keep her composure. Tonight, however, was different. There was a sharper, more vicious edge to Isabella's cruelty. She arrived with two friends who mirrored her casual disdain, their laughter echoing too loudly in the opulent room. They were celebrating, Isabella had announced, the finalization of a massive family business deal. "Daddy is finally clearing out some of the old, dusty clutter," she'd said, waving a dismissive hand at the paintings on the wall, making way for something new, something more profitable. A cold knot formed in Clara's stomach. Dusty clutter? She looked at the Homer, at the sea foam crashing against the rocks with such vibrant life, and felt a pang of protective anger. The evening devolved from there. Isabella found fault with everything. The champagne wasn't cold enough. The seared scallops were a touch too rubbery. She sent back a perfectly cooked steak, claiming it was medium rare when she had asked for medium rare. With each complaint, she would glance at her friends, a silent cue for them to pull out their phones and start recording, documenting her performance for their social media. Clara recognized the pattern. This wasn't about the food, it was about the show. It was about manufacturing a narrative of her own supreme importance by diminishing someone else's. Clara endured it all. She thought of Eleanor's medication, of the landlord's final warning. She smiled, she apologized, she fetched, she carried. She was a ghost in a crisp white uniform, her own feelings packed away like winter clothes. The final act began with a simple glass of water. As Clara leaned in to refill Isabella's glass, Isabella gestured dramatically while telling a story, her arm knocking into Clara's. A small amount of water, no more than a few tablespoons, sloshed onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was inches from Isabella's silk dress, but not a single drop touched it. "You clumsy oaf!" Isabella shrieked, leaping to her feet as if she'd been doused with acid. The volume of her voice was a physical blow, silencing the entire dining room. "This is a custom dress. Do you have any idea how much this costs? It's more than you make in a year." "I am so sorry," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. "You moved your arm. Are you blaming me?" Isabella's eyes widened in theatrical disbelief. "You're blaming me for your incompetence. Unbelievable. Mr. Dubois, get over here. I want this thing fired immediately." Mr. Dubois scurried over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Miss Thorne, I am so sorry. Is there anything—" "There is something," Isabella cut him off, her eyes locking onto Clara's. A cruel smile played on her lips. She picked up her own full glass of ice water. "She seems to think spilling water is no big deal. I think she needs a lesson in consequences." Clara saw it coming in slow motion. The lift of the arm, the tilt of the glass, the glint of the chandeliers in the cascading water. She was frozen, a deer in the headlights of pure, unadulterated malice. Then came the cold, the shock, the silence, and in that silence a new sound emerged, the solid, authoritative thump of a cane against the marble floor. "That is quite enough." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the stunned atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. Every head turned towards the corner booth. The old man, Alistair Finch, rose slowly from his seat. He was tall and lean, his bespoke suit hanging on his frame, with an elegance that spoke of old money, not new. He wasn't the owner of the restaurant, he was the restaurant's very foundation, its history made flesh. But in recent years, since his wife's passing, and his own health had declined, he had ceded control to his son-in-law, Richard Thorne, Isabella's father. He had become a figurehead, a relic, or so everyone thought. He walked towards the table, his movements deliberate, his gaze fixed on his granddaughter. The air crackled with a tension far greater than before. This was not a manager placating a customer. This was a king surveying a rebellion in his court. Isabella's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" "I was enjoying a quiet dinner," Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm, "until my granddaughter decided to provide some rather distasteful dinner theatre." He stopped beside Clara, who stood dripping and shivering, and for a moment he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it felt like an anchor. He then turned his full attention back to Isabella. "Tell me, Isabella, what part of your upbringing taught you that this is acceptable behavior?" "She was incompetent. She spilled water on me," Isabella protested, her voice losing its commanding tone, becoming thin and reedy. "I have been sitting here since you arrived," Alistair stated, his words measured and clear. "I have a rather excellent view of this table. I watched this young woman serve you with a patience that borders on sainthood. I watched you invent flaws, create problems, and bully her for the amusement of your vapid friends." He glanced at the two other girls, who now looked as if they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Their phones had vanished. "And I just watched you assault her. It was just water." "It was an act of profound cruelty," Alistair corrected, his voice dropping lower. "It was a demonstration of everything I have spent my life fighting against. The belief that wealth gives you the right to strip another human being of their dignity. You have learned nothing. You have inherited my money, but not a single one of my values." He looked at Clara, his eyes softening with a deep, weary sadness. "Young lady, I am profoundly sorry. On behalf of my family, I apologize for this disgraceful display." Then his gaze returned to Isabella, and the ice returned. "The massive family business deal you were celebrating. Was that your father's plan to sell off the collection?" Isabella paled, her jaw dropping slightly. How? How did you know? Because he has been trying to do it for years, and I have always forbidden it, Alistair said. He looked around the room at the paintings that were his life's passion. He called them dusty clutter, an interesting choice of words. You see, this clutter is not merely decoration, it is the heart of this place. And it is my legacy. A legacy your father, and it seems you, are determined to liquidate for a new yacht and a few more custom dresses. He turned to the sweating Mr. Dubois. Please escort Miss Thorne and her friends out of my restaurant. Their credit line here is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do that, Isabella shrieked, the last of her composure shattering. Daddy runs this company now. You're just an old man in a suit. Alistair Finch smiled, a thin, cold, humourless expression. That is where you are mistaken, my dear. Your father runs the company because I allow him to. I still hold the controlling interest. I am not just an old man in a suit. I am the man who signs the cheques. And as of this moment, yours will no longer be honoured. Not your apartment, not your car, not your allowance. You are cut off. You wish to understand the value of things? Then I suggest you go out into the world and earn it. As Mr. Dubois and two other waiters moved forward to escort the sputtering, protesting Isabella away, Alistair turned back to Clara. The entire restaurant remained silent, watching the drama unfold. Miss, I'm sorry I don't know your name, he said, his voice now gentle. Clara. Clara Hayes, she managed to whisper, still trying to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. Miss Hayes, he said, his eyes finding hers. They were sharp, intelligent, and held a depth of perception that made her feel seen for the first time all night. You are an art history student, are you not? Clara blinked, utterly stunned. I was. How could you possibly know that? I have seen the way you look at the paintings, he replied simply. Not as a server looks at the decor, but as a scholar looks at a primary source. I saw you notice the craquelure on the cassette last week, and the Ines by the service station. You have a very good eye. He paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. I believe you and I have much to discuss. But first, let's get you a dry towel and a hot cup of tea, and then I would like you to tell me everything you know about forgeries. In the hushed quiet of Alistair Finch's private office, located on the mezzanine level overlooking the main dining room, the world began to feel real again. The office was a sanctuary of old leather, dark wood, and the comforting scent of books and beeswax. Marcus, the head waiter, and a man who had worked for Alistair for 30 years, had brought Clara a dry uniform from staff supply, a thick, warm towel, and a porcelain cup of steaming Earl Grey tea that warmed her hands and her soul. Alistair sat behind a large mahogany desk, not in a position of power, but as if seeking refuge in its familiar solidity. The fire in his eyes from the dining room had been replaced by a profound weariness. He looked every one of his 80 years. I must apologize again, Clara, he began, his voice raspy with emotion. What you endured tonight was the culmination of my own failures. I gave my daughter everything she wanted, and she in turn gave her daughter, Isabella, everything. We built a gilded cage, and were surprised when the person inside had no concept of the world beyond its bars. You stood up for me, Mr. Finch, Clara said, her voice still a little shaky. No one has ever done that before. Thank you. Please call me Alistair, and I did what any decent human being should have done, he countered, waving a dismissive hand. But my motives, I confess, are not entirely altruistic. When Isabella mentioned her father was clearing out the dusty clutter, It confirmed a fear I have harbored for some time. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. My son-in-law, Richard Thorne, is a man who understands balance sheets, but not beauty. He sees my collection not as a cultural treasure, but as a portfolio of underperforming assets. For years he has argued that we should sell the originals and hang high-quality reproductions. The patrons won't know the difference, he always says, and will unlock millions in capital. Alistair's eyes drifted to a small, beautifully rendered painting on the wall behind him, a quiet scene of a woman reading by a window, the light falling softly on her face. That was the first piece I ever bought, a small work by Theodore Robinson. I was 25 years old, working as a junior architect. I saved for 2 years to afford it. It cost me nearly everything I had, but it taught me that some things have a value that cannot be quantified in dollars. Richard has never understood that. Clara followed his gaze. She knew the painting. It was a masterpiece of American Impressionism, intimate and serene. The thought of it being replaced by a soulless copy felt like a physical violation. "You think he's already done it?" Clara stated, the pieces clicking into place. "That's what you meant by forgeries." Alistair nodded grimly. "I suspect he has been replacing them one by one. Slowly, so I wouldn't notice on my infrequent visits. He plans a grand auction, the Aria collection, and I suspect a significant portion of what he intends to sell are fakes, while the real masterpieces are funneled off to private buyers, untraceably. He will defraud the art world, destroy the restaurant's reputation, and erase my legacy in one fell swoop. The deal Isabella was celebrating, I believe it was the finalization of that auction." He looked at Clara, his gaze intense. "I am an old man, Clara. My eyesight is not what it once was. My influence in the day-to-day operations has been systematically eroded by Richard. He portrays me as a sentimental relic, out of touch with modern business. If I raise a fuss, he will have me declared incompetent. I need proof. I need an expert eye, one that he won't see coming." The implication hung in the air between them. He wasn't just offering sympathy, he was offering a proposition. "You want me to help you?" Clara said, her heart pounding. This was insane. She was a waitress, not an art detective. "I want to hire you," he corrected gently. "As a consultant. Your duties at the restaurant would provide the perfect cover. You can observe the paintings up close, every day, without arousing suspicion. I have the original provenance documents, the receipts, the high-resolution photographs from when they were first acquired. We can compare them. You have the knowledge, the eye for detail, that I no longer possess." He saw the hesitation and fear in her face. "I know this is a great deal to ask. It is dangerous. If Richard finds out, he will not only fire you, he could make your life very difficult. But I will not ask you to do this for nothing." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a checkbook. "Your grandmother, Eleanor, I believe. She is at St. Jude's Cardiac Care Unit. Her physician is Dr. Annapurna Singh. Her outstanding balance is approximately $47,000, and her ongoing treatment is estimated at another $60,000 for the next year." Clara stared at him, speechless. How could he know all that? "When I decided to intervene tonight, I had my assistant do some research," Alistair explained, seeing her shock. "I do not believe in fighting battles without understanding the terrain. I will pay off her entire medical debt. I will establish a trust to cover all her future medical expenses. And I will fund the completion of your degree at any university you choose. Not as charity, Clara, but as payment for your services. Your expertise is valuable. It is time you were compensated for it." It was an impossible offer. It was a way out. It was a solution to every sleepless night, every desperate prayer. But it was also terrifying. She would be going up against a powerful, ruthless man. She thought of her grandmother, her frail hands, her unwavering belief in Clara's potential. She thought of the beauty of the paintings on the walls downstairs and the ugly greed that sought to replace them with lies. And she thought of the humiliation she had just endured, the feeling of being powerless. This was a chance to reclaim that power, not with cruelty or wealth, but with knowledge, with the one thing that was truly hers. The Winslow Homer, Clara said, her voice finding a new strength. The one by the main entrance, the Eastern Point light. Alistair looked surprised. Yes? What about it? The seafoam, Clara said, her mind's eye picturing it perfectly. Homer had a unique way of rendering seafoam. He used an almost dry brush technique, scraping the Chinese white pigment across the canvas to give it texture and light. When I was cleaning the glass on that frame 2 days ago, the light from the window hit it just right. The seafoam, it was too smooth, too flat. There was no texture. Alistair Finch leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was the first genuine smile Clara had seen from him. "I knew I was right about you," he said softly. "Welcome to the fight, Miss Hayes." The following weeks transformed Aria from a workplace into a battleground. On the surface, nothing changed. Clara continued her shifts, gliding between tables with practiced efficiency, her expression a mask of polite neutrality. But beneath the surface, she was a spy in plain sight. Her new mission gave her a sense of purpose that sharpened her senses and steadied her nerves. The first step was to establish a baseline. Alistair gave her a key to his office, where she spent her breaks and the hours after her shifts poring over the collection's archives. The files were immaculate. For each painting, there was a folder containing the original bill of sale, certificates of authenticity, and, most importantly, a series of high-resolution photographs taken by a professional art photographer decades ago. Clara studied these images with the intensity of a forensic scientist, memorizing every brushstroke, every subtle crack in the paint, every nuance of color and shadow. Her dog-eared Jansons. History of art was now supplemented by auction catalogues and monographs on the artists in the collection. Her work on the dining floor became a series of covert operations. While polishing silverware, she would position herself to study the Mary Cassatt, noting how the light in the painting seemed to lack the soft, pearlescent glow she saw in the archival photos. The subject's skin tone seemed slightly off, a little too pink, a little less alive. While refilling a water glass, she would pause for a fraction of a second by the George Innes, her eyes tracing the tree line. The original photos showed a delicate, almost feathery application of paint for the foliage. The one on the wall was subtly muddier, lacking the master's ethereal touch. Each discrepancy was a small victory. She documented everything in a small, coded notebook she kept hidden in her locker. Cassatt, complexion rosy, lacks layered depth. Check file C02. Innes, foliage heavy-handed. Compare with photo I01, quadrant 4. Alistair, meanwhile, played his part perfectly. He began visiting the restaurant more frequently, always sitting in Clara's section. To the staff, he was just a lonely old man taking an interest in the kind waitress his granddaughter had mistreated. During these dinners, they would have quiet, hurried conversations. "Richard is moving faster than I anticipated," Alistair murmured one evening, pretending to study the wine list. "The auction is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. It's being handled by a lesser-known house in Zurich, likely to avoid the scrutiny of Sotheby's or Christie's. He's billing it as an American legacy." "The irony," Clara whispered back, placing his bread plate on the table. "I've identified 7 probable forgeries so far. The Homer, the Cassatt, the Ines, and 4 smaller landscapes. They're excellent copies, Alistair. Almost perfect. They were clearly done by a master forger. But the artist, whoever he is, has a tell. A tick." "What is it?" Alistair asked, his eyes gleaming with interest. "The color blue," Clara said. "Specifically, cerulean blue. In every one of the suspected fakes, the shade of blue is just a tiny bit too vibrant, too modern. The pigments used by Homer or Cassatt would have been ground from different minerals. They would have aged differently. This blue, it's too clean. It's a synthetic pigment that wasn't widely available, or at least not in this exact formulation, when these were painted. It's a small thing, but it's consistent across all 7 pieces." Alistair's respect for her grew with each discovery. He saw in her not a victim he was saving, but a brilliant partner he was lucky to have found. He fulfilled his end of the bargain without hesitation. The hospital called Clara one afternoon to inform her that an anonymous benefactor had settled her grandmother's entire account. The next day, a thick envelope arrived from a law firm detailing the trust fund established in Eleanor Hayes's name. A separate one contained acceptance letters and scholarship offers from the top 3 university art programs in the country, all arranged and fully funded. Clara cried for a solid hour, a release of years of pent-up fear and anxiety. The weight was gone. Now all that was left was the fight. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mr. Dubois, the manager, had been walking on eggshells ever since the incident with Isabella. He was terrified of Richard Thorne, but he was also an old employee of Alistair's and seemed to be suffering a crisis of conscience. One night, as Clara was clocking out, he pulled her aside. "Miss Hayes," he stammered, avoiding her eyes. I know what's going on. About the paintings." Clara's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," he whispered, his hands trembling. "Mr. Thorne has me arranging the shipping manifests. The paintings are being sent to Zurich in 2 weeks. But the insurance valuations, they don't match the inventory. Some of the most valuable pieces are listed under a different holding company, being shipped to a private address in the Cayman Islands." He slid a folded piece of paper into her hand. "This is the access code to the shipping company's online portal. I don't know what you can do with it, but my conscience is clear. Mr. Finch was always good to me." He scurried away before she could respond. That night, in Alistair's office, they logged into the portal. It was all there. 2 separate shipping lists. One, for the Zurich auction house, listed 20 paintings. The other, for the Shell Corporation in the Caymans, listed 7. The 7 most valuable pieces in the collection. The same 7 Clara had identified as forgeries. "He's not just selling fakes at the auction," Alistair breathed, his face ashen. "He's stealing the originals for himself. The auction is just a cover, a way to launder the fakes into the legitimate art market while he walks away with the real collection." "We have him," Clara said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "We have the proof." "A shipping manifest can be explained away as a clerical error," Alistair countered. His mind all writ, the plan was an exercise in controlled insanity, a high-wire act with no net, and it hinged entirely on the fulcrum of Richard Thorne's twin vices, greed and arrogance. Alistair, moving with the quiet, devastating precision of a grandmaster, maneuvering his final pieces, had a former associate, a man who owed him a life debt, and moved in the rarefied air of international art dealers, leak the most intoxicating of rumors. It was whispered in the right galleries, mentioned over the right brandies, and finally typed into the encrypted messaging app of a highly influential and notoriously discreet art world blogger. The story was simple, elegant, and irresistible. A reclusive European industrialist, known for his aggressive and decisive acquisitions, was preparing a preemptive, all-cash offer for the entire Aurea collection. The figure mentioned was astronomical, a number designed to bypass reason and ignite the basest instincts of a man like Richard Thorne. It would allow him to avoid the auction house's commission, the prying eyes of tax authorities, and the lengthy process of public sale. The only condition, the rumor insisted, was an immediate private inspection by the industrialist's most trusted expert before the collection was crated for Zurich. As Alistair had foreseen, the fish took the bait with a violent lunge. The prospect of such a clean, monumental score was too much for Richard to resist. He agreed to a late-night viewing at the restaurant after the last staff member had gone and the city had settled into a hush. The expert, the formidable and famously mercurial Dr. Lena Petrova, was, of course, Clara. That night, Aria was a ghost of itself. The warm, convivial glow was gone, replaced by a stark, theatrical chiaroscuro. A few strategically placed spotlights illuminated the paintings on the walls, making them seem to float in an ocean of darkness. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the climate control system. Clara felt the silence in her bones. She wore a severe, charcoal grey suit Alistair had tailored for her, a garment that felt both like armour and a costume. Her hair, usually a soft frame for her face, was pulled back into a chignon, so tight it made her scalp ache. Thick, horn-rimmed glasses, non-prescription, perched on her nose, lending her an air of owlish severity. In her hand, she carried a sleek aluminum case containing a digital microscope, a portable UV lamp, and a tablet computer. She was not Clara Hayes, the waitress. She was Dr. Petrova, a woman who did not suffer fools, a woman who could dismantle a reputation with a single, damning observation. She repeated the name in her head, a mantra against the frantic hammering of her own heart. Richard Thorne stood near the entrance, a portrait of smug triumph. He was dressed in a cashmere turtleneck and tailored trousers, looking less like a businessman and more like a villain from a spy film. Beside him, shifting his weight from foot to foot, was a small, balding man with the perpetually worried expression of a rabbit. His suit was rumpled, and he clutched a leather briefcase to his chest as if it contained a live bomb. Alistair was already there, seated at a small table in the shadows, playing the role of the superannuated patriarch, a mere formality in his son-in-law's grand transaction. "Dr. Petrova," Richard said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his smile predatory. "A pleasure. This is my curator, Mr. Pym. He has all the necessary paperwork." Clara gave his hand a brief, firm shake, her touch deliberately cold. She merely nodded at Mr. Pym, who flinched as if she had shouted at him. She had practiced the accent for a week with a dialect coach Alistair had hired, a stern Russian woman who had drilled her relentlessly. It was now a part of her, a faint, precise cadence that clipped the ends of her words. "The pleasure will be determined by the authenticity of the collection, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice flat. "My employer does not pay for pleasantries. He pays for provenance. Shall we?" Without waiting for a reply, she moved to the first painting, a small landscape by the Ashcan school artist, Robert Henry. She didn't feign a cursory glance. She committed to the performance. She consulted her tablet, which displayed the high-resolution archival images Alistair had provided. She peered at the canvas through a jeweler's loupe, her expression unreadable. Richard followed a step behind her, a confident host showing off his home, while Mr. Pym trailed them both like a nervous shadow. Clara moved with a chilling, methodical pace. She was a silent storm of scrutiny. At the Mary Cassatt, she spent a full 5 minutes taking microscopic photographs of the subject's cheek. The craquelure is inconsistent with late 19th century oil pigments subjected to this level of humidity, she murmured, more to herself than to them, typing a note into her tablet. Richard's smile tightened a fraction of an inch. At the George Innes, she ran a gloved finger lightly over the surface of the protective glass. "The impasto on the foliage," she stated, not looking at him. "It lacks the spiritual, almost ethereal quality of Innes's late period. It feels technical, soulless." With each observation, each quiet, damning note, the atmosphere in the room grew colder. The space between Richard's shoulder blades seemed to tense. Mr. Pym had begun to sweat, dabbing at his shiny scalp with a handkerchief. Clara could feel their anxiety, a palpable energy in the dark room. She was no longer a waitress they could dismiss. She was an oracle, and they were hanging on her every word, dreading the prophecy she was about to deliver. She saved the Winslow Homer for last. It hung in the place of honor by the grand entrance, the spotlight hitting the sea foam on the waves. She stood before it for a long, dramatic minute, utterly still. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. "An impressive forgery," she said finally, her voice cutting through the tension like breaking glass. Richard Thorne laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Doctor, I assure you, your eyes must be failing. This is the centerpiece of the collection. Its provenance is impeccable." "Its provenance may be," Clara countered, turning to face him, her eyes cold behind the glasses. "But the painting is not. The artist, the forger, is exceptionally skilled. His brushwork is a near-perfect mimicry of Homer's style. His understanding of the palette is remarkable. But he has made 2 mistakes. One is technical, the other is emotional." She raised the UV lamp from her kit. "May I?" she asked, a rhetorical question. She flicked it on, and a ghostly purple light washed over the canvas. The seafoam, which had looked so brilliant moments before, now fluoresced with a sickly, chemical green. Homer, like his contemporaries, used a lead-white base. It is dense, warm, and under ultraviolet light, it is largely inert. "This," she said, gesturing with the lamp, "is zinc white, laced with a modern acrylic polymer. It creates this garish glow. It is a mistake a first-year conservation student would not make. It is the signature of a forger who is very, very good, but not a genius." Richard's face had become a pale, taut mask. This is an outrage, a trick of the light." "Then let us discuss the emotional mistake," Clara continued, switching off the lamp and plunging the painting back into normal light. She stepped closer to the canvas, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, more damning. Homer painted the sea with respect, with fear. He understood its violence and its beauty. You can feel the salt spray, you can hear the roar. His sea foam is not just white paint, it is the chaotic, terrifying energy of the ocean made manifest. "This," she said, her finger hovering an inch from the canvas, "is merely a picture of sea foam. It is technically correct, but it is empty. It has no soul, because the man who painted it does not respect the sea. He only respects the paycheck he received for copying it." She turned her gaze from the painting and settled it, with surgical precision, on the trembling Mr. Pym. "Isn't that right, Mr. Pym? You are a gifted copyist, truly. But you are not an artist, and your tell, your little tick, is your reliance on a particular synthetic cerulean blue that didn't exist in this formulation, until 1972. I found it in all 7 of the forgeries hanging in this room. Mr. Pym made a small, strangled sound, and his briefcase slipped from his sweaty fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The clasps sprang open, revealing not documents, but dozens of tubes of paint and a set of well-worn brushes. The game was over. "This is preposterous," Richard blustered, his voice a desperate roar in the silent room. He took a step toward Clara, his face contorted with rage. "I will not be slandered by some fraudulent charlatan." "It's over, Richard." Alistair's voice, quiet and laced with iron, came from the shadows. He rose from his chair, no longer a frail old man, but a towering figure of judgment. He held his phone in his hand, its screen glowing softly. "The reclusive industrialist you've been so eager to deal with is, in fact, Senior Investigator Markham from the District Attorney's Art Crime Unit. He and his team have been listening to this entire conversation via the open line on this phone. They have Mr. Dubois' sworn statement detailing the fraudulent shipping manifests. They have the Cayman Island Shell Corporation in your name. And now, thanks to the brilliant Dr. Petrova, or should I say, Miss Clara Hayes, they have an expert witness to the active commission of a felony." As if summoned by his words, the grand double doors of Aria swung inward. 2 grim-faced detectives in sharp suits entered, flanked by uniformed officers who moved with a calm, inexorable purpose. The illusion of the quiet, empty restaurant was shattered, replaced by the stark reality of the law. Richard Thorne stared, his carefully constructed world dissolving into smoke. His eyes, wide with disbelief and dawning horror, darted from the police to Alistair and finally to Clara. The hatred in his gaze was a physical force. "You!" he hissed, the word dripping with venom, "the little waitress, the nobody." "This was you." Alistair stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara, a protective gesture that spoke volumes. "She is not a nobody," he said, his voice resonating with a cold, righteous anger. "She is Clara Hayes. She possesses more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. She is the guardian of a legacy you tried to sell for scrap, and for that, I am eternally in her debt." In a final, desperate act of nihilism, Richard lunged, not at Alistair, not at Clara, but at the fake Homer on the wall. A guttural scream tore from his throat. "If I can't have it, no one can." His fingers clawed at the frame, intending to rip the canvas from its moorings, but the officers were on him in a heartbeat, subduing him with practiced, impersonal efficiency. His furious, impotent shrieks echoed through the opulent dining room as they forced his hands behind his back, the sharp click of the handcuffs sealing his fate. As they led him, and the openly weeping Mr. Pym away, the vast room fell silent once more. The only sound was the faint hum of the climate control, standing guard over the art. Alistair walked over to a panel on the wall and flipped a switch. The main chandeliers flickered to life, flooding the room with a warm, golden light, chasing away the dramatic shadows and revealing the room for what it was. Not a crime scene, but a sanctuary. In the sudden brightness, Alistair looked at Clara. The immense strain of the past weeks was etched on his face, but his eyes shone with a profound, weary relief. "The real paintings," Clara said, the Russian accent gone, her own voice returning, soft and trembling slightly with the receding adrenaline. "Where are they?" Alistair gave her a small, genuine smile. Mr. Pym, it turns out, is a meticulous record keeper. Once the detectives explained the difference in sentencing between a cooperating witness and a co-conspirator, he sang like a canary. They are in a climate-controlled storage unit in Hackensack, New Jersey, under the name Eleanor Rigby. Apparently, he's a Beatles fan. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. They're safe, Clara. Because of you. You saved them all. The aftermath was not a thunderclap, but a slow, cleansing rain. The Thorne scandal became the city's favourite cautionary tale, a saga of hubris and downfall played out in the headlines. Richard, denied bail, was convicted on a mountain of evidence. His empire was dismantled, his assets frozen, his name reduced to a synonym for disgrace. Aria closed its doors for 2 months. It was a period of quiet restoration. The 7 original masterpieces were brought back from New Jersey in an armoured truck, a silent, triumphant procession. Clara stood beside Alistair as a team of expert conservators inspected and rehung each piece. When the real Winslow Homer was settled back in its place, Clara reached out and touched the frame, feeling a connection to it that was deeper than ownership. It was a bond forged in shared peril and mutual rescue. She never wore the Waitress uniform again. Alistair, with the full backing of the board he had now reclaimed, created a new position, director of the Finch Collection and curator of Aria. Her office was the one on the mezzanine, the one that had belonged to Alistair, filled with leather-bound books and a view of the entire dining room. Her salary was more than she had ever dreamed of, but the real payment was the work itself. She spent her days researching, writing, and preserving the art she loved. She started a program of pre-dinner art talks, and to her surprise, they became wildly popular. Patrons would arrive early, a glass of champagne in hand, and listen with rapt attention as Clara spoke about the life of Mary Cassatt or the techniques of the Ashcan school. She was no longer a ghost in the background. She was the soul of the room, her voice weaving stories that gave the paintings life. Her grandmother's recovery was the true masterpiece. Freed from the crushing weight of debt and given the best possible care, Eleanor's strength returned day by day. She moved back to their small apartment, which Clara had since renovated, filling it with light and comfortable furniture. One Sunday afternoon, Clara brought Eleanor to Aria for the first time. They sat at Alistair's favourite table, and Eleanor looked around the room, her eyes, clear and bright, moving from painting to painting. Finally, they rested on a small, elegant brass plaque near the entrance. It read, "The Alistair Finch Collection, curated and preserved by Clara Hayes." Eleanor reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand. She didn't say a word, but the pride in her eyes was more eloquent than any speech. About a year later, on a brisk autumn afternoon, the new restaurant manager came to Clara's office. "There's a young woman here to apply for a hostess position," she said, handing Clara a resume. "She has no experience, but there's something about her, a desperation. I thought maybe you should see her." Clara took the paper. The name typed at the top was Isabella Thorne. Clara's breath caught in her chest. She remembered the visceral sting of the ice water, the heat of 100 staring eyes, the cold, sharp edges of humiliation. The memory was a scar, faded but still present. She thought of Alistair's words about gilded cages, about inheriting money but not values. She walked down the curved staircase to the waiting area. Isabella sat on the edge of a velvet bench. She was almost unrecognizable. The couture clothes were gone, replaced by a simple black dress that was clean but worn. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a profound weariness that seemed to have settled deep into her bones. She was thinner, and her eyes, which had once flashed with casual cruelty, were now fixed on the floor, shadowed with shame. When she looked up and saw Clara, a wave of panic and mortification washed over her face. She scrambled to her feet, ready to bolt. "Wait," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped Isabella cold. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse. "I shouldn't have. I saw the ad and I'll go." Clara looked at the young woman who had tried to break her. She saw not a monster, but the wreckage of a life built on a rotten foundation. She saw the end result of a world where everything had a price and nothing had value. "The hostess position is difficult," Clara said, her tone measured and professional, devoid of either pity or malice. "You are on your feet for 8 hours. You are the first and last person our guests see. You must be gracious and polite, even to people who are dismissive, demanding, or cruel. You must handle the pressure of a fully booked night with composure. The pay is $14 an hour. Tips are shared. There is no trust fund to fall back on if you have a bad week." She paused, letting the reality of the words sink in. "Do you want this job, Isabella?" Isabella looked up, her eyes swimming with a disbelief so profound it was painful to watch. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "You would, after what I did, you would hire me." "I'm not hiring the person you were," Clara said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I am offering a job to the person you might become. Everyone deserves the chance to build something real, but you will have to earn it. Not just once, but every single day. From me and from yourself." Isabella stood there for a long moment, the chaos of her past year swirling around her. Then, for the first time, she looked Clara directly in the eye and gave a slow, trembling nod. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was an acceptance. Later that evening, long after Isabella had filled out her paperwork and gone, Clara stood alone in the center of the dining room. The dinner service was about to begin, and a quiet, expectant energy filled the air. The lights were low, the crystal gleamed, and the paintings on the wall seemed to breathe in the tranquil atmosphere. Her gaze fell upon the Winslow Homer. The sea foam, textured and alive, caught the light, a perfect storm of chaos and beauty frozen in time. She had come to this place as a ghost, desperate and invisible. She had learned that a person's worth, like a painting's, had nothing to do with its frame or its price tag, but with the authenticity of its heart. And in the quiet dignity of that room, surrounded by the enduring legacy she had saved, Clara Hayes understood that she had finally created a masterpiece entirely her own.